Alright, so we're back. This, I have to tell you, has to be one of my favorite slides this entire semester. Take a look at it. Can you guess why I love it so much? Okay, seriously, I just think it's the most amazing thing in the world. We've got Dracula riding a T-Rex with zombies and other vampires riding pterodactyls and UFOs. Look at all these genres of horror movie being connected together in one slide. Bam! Connective tissue. That's what it does. Connects things. Love it. Yeah. A little bit of quirky me. All right. So connective tissues. Different than our epithelial tissue. So these cells, unlike epithelial tissues, the cells themselves rarely touch. So you're going to have a cell, it's going to secrete something, and then there's another cell some distance away. So again, unlike in epithelial tissues where cells are like right up against one another, we have all this extracellular matrix. This matrix is made up of something called fibers and ground substance. And fibers are just that. They're so these protein strands that are in this extracellular space. This second term, this ground substance, it's just a terrible word. I don't like it. It makes me think of ground meat, ground beef or something. So ground substance is essentially stuff. Okay, so it's not you have cell, stuff, another cell. That stuff in between those two cells is matrix. The fibers, or simply fibers, there's a couple different kinds. And then everything else that's not a fiber is ground substance. Now, depending on where you are, that ground substance can be minerals. So if you're in bones, it's very mineralized, it's very hard. If you're in blood, that ground substance is very fluid, it's watery. Okay? So it just depends on where you are. It can vary quite a great deal. It tends to have a very good nerve and blood supply. The only place where it doesn't have a very good blood supply is going to be in your cartilage and in your tendons. Okay? But otherwise, anywhere else, you have a very good nerve supply. All right, so let's talk about those fibers in that extracellular matrix. So we have three different types. Collagen fibers, they're made up of a protein called collagen. That's easy enough, right? Fairly tough. It resists stretching. It does stretch a little bit, but more often than not, what it's doing is it's giving things that are harder a little bit of elasticity so they don't just shatter. Okay? We'll talk about collagen again when we talk about bones. There's actually quite a bit of collagen fibers in bones, and it's actually really important. There are elastic fibers. They're made up of a protein called elastin. So again, should be easy to remember. And just as their name implies, they're gonna be stretchy. So we're gonna see elastic fibers. Not just in connective tissue. We'll actually see collagen and elastic fibers in some other parts of the body as well. There's reticular fibers. This is the one that you did not see in lab. These are made of collagen and a glycoprotein. You get these reticular fibers. Whenever you hear that term reticular, what it means is it's forming a network or mesh, kind of like a web or like a fishing net, I guess. So that's what these reticular fibers do. They form sort of a mesh-like structure. Okay. So let's talk about different types of connective tissue. We have connective tissue proper, which is made of loose connective tissue, dense connective tissue. So you can kind of see there's a little bit on the two of those. Cartilage, we'll see different types of cartilage. Bone, we have compact or spongy bone. And then there's blood and lymph. And blood and lymph, we're going to end up covering in 202 to a greater degree. Is like the whole, when you start 202, that's what you go over is blood and lymph. So really we're going to, in 201, we'll focus more on these first three throughout the semester. You have a link to a Prezi, and I don't know if you guys know what a Prezi is. Maybe some of you do, some of you don't. So PowerPoint, you have one slide, next slide, next slide. Prezi is a little bit different. It's more like you have one big slide, And you may have an image here, you may have a picture on the screen. And so then you take a look at what's here, and you zoom into that, and you're like, oh, this is all the things that have to do with this. And you zoom back out. You go to the next sort of part of this thing. You zoom in, you zoom out. It's great in that it gives you sort of a bird's eye view of the topic and allows you to zoom in, zoom out. So you don't tend to get as lost as, you know, with all the information out there. You're able to like kind of keep things in categories a little bit nicer. The only downside to Prezzies is because you're zooming in, you're zooming out, you're kind of like moving around. Sometimes people get a little bit like dizzy with it. So I'm not actually using the Prezi in this presentation to prevent vertigo from happening. But you guys do have a link to it, so if you don't like the linearity of the PowerPoint slide, feel free to view the Prezi. It's not narrated, but it's basically the exact same thing in just a slightly different format. All right, so we're going to start with loose connective tissue. It's called loose connective tissue because fibers are loosely woven throughout the tissue, so they're not tightly woven, I guess, as by definition they wouldn't be. Okay. We have a couple of subtypes, okay, so areolar, adipose, reticulate. So let's take a look at areolar. This is what you saw in lab. We have elastic fibers and collagen fibers. Now in this image, the black are the elastic fibers. And I guess they're kind of blackish in what you would have seen in the microscope here. They might have been like more like a dark purple. The collagen fibers underneath the microscope are the thicker ones. They wouldn't have been tan. They would have been like a pinkish color. All these nuclei are these fibroblasts. So what you're seeing here again is here's a cell, there's some space, and that space is filled with fibers as well as brown substance. And then you have another cell some distance away from it. So areolar connective tissue, and what you're seeing here is like in your skin, the fat layer, the subcutaneous layer underneath your skin is made up of areolar connective tissue. Adipose tissue, you know what adipose tissue is. You have it all, you know, different parts of your body. What's kind of interesting, so each one of these little bubbles here is an adipocyte, so an actual cell. And so these cells accumulate so much oil that all the contents of the cell, so all the Golgi apparatus, the left endoplasmic reticulum, mitochondria, all of that ends up getting squished into the periphery. The middle part of the cell is just being taken up by all this oil that it's storing. So again, you find it in padding organs, like underneath the layers of your skin, around your heart, around your kidneys, all sorts of different areas. Now, interestingly, you know, we don't really hear too much about brown fat, so I don't know how many of you guys know about this. So most of the other fat we call yellow fat because it looks yellow. But brown fat, unlike yellow fat, actually looks brown because it's got all these blood vessels going to it, which is kind of interesting. The only time that you have blood vessels going to something is if it's very metabolically active. And these adipocytes tend not to be very metabolically active, the classic yellow ones at least. They're not very active because they're there to store energy, so you don't want them using it up, right? Now, brown fat is very different. It's got a lot of blood vessels going to it, gets this brownish appearance, very metabolically active. Usually it's found in the back behind, like right between your shoulder blades. Sometimes a little bit on the chest in this area. And because it's very metabolically active, it's giving off lots of heat. So you see a larger amount of this brown fat in infants, and it helps infants stay warm because they're so little and there's all surface area to them. Now, as we get older, that brown fat becomes less and less in our bodies. However, it still has the same function. It kind of keeps us warm and still just burns calories producing heat. And the amount that each individual has will vary. So you might have more, might have less, or vice versa. What they found is that some people who have a hard time gaining weight, not a lot of times, but some of these individuals, they actually have quite a bit of brown fat. So the idea is that even though they might eat a lot of food, this brown fat is burning off calories so fast that they're not actually gaining any weight. You may also have friends that, you know people like this, right? You may also have friends who it can be like cold somewhere and they're like, now I'm hot. They're always hot. It may be because they have more brown fat. I'm not saying that's the only reason, but it could be a contributing factor. In fact, and I don't know what has ever happened with this, but I know there is some research looking into helping people lose weight by stimulating their natural brown fat reserves. Because if you can get them to upregulate, they'll burn more calories, and so people would theoretically be able to lose weight. We still won't have that magic pill, but who knows, maybe in the future. Then reticular connective tissue is going to be made up of reticular fibers. So I'm going to kind of get rid of my image here so you can see some of this. And one of the areas that you're seeing it here is in the lymph node. So basically this gives framework to the organ. It helps hold it together. So you'll find in other areas like your spleen as well as bone marrow. So again, it's basically there to give structure to whatever that tissue is. So those we just talked about were loose connective tissue. We also have dense connective tissue. So this first type of it is dense regular connective tissue. Dense because these fibers are very close together, and regular because they're all basically arranged in the same direction. Okay? So these are collagen fibers that are running in parallel bundles, and then you can see here the nuclei of the fibroblasts. So classic places where you have dense regular connective tissue are in tendons and in ligaments. Now, just in case I didn't mention this to you earlier, the difference between tendons and ligaments is simply that tendons anchor muscles to bone. And so tendons are linking muscles to bone. Ligaments link bone to bone. That's the only real difference between the two. But this makes sense because when muscles and, well, basically muscles pull on something, they're always going to pull at it from the same angle. So these fibers can line up along those lines of stress. So they can be nice and regular. And you've probably all seen this. You know that, like, when you get, a chicken breast or something like that, and there's a really tough white thing in there? That's a muscle tendon, is what that is. Okay, so if you want to know what a muscle tendon looks like, get one of those chicken breasts, and then that white, tough fiber thing in it, that's going to be a tendon. Yay, you learned something new today. All right, so if we had dense regular connective tissue, we now have dense irregular connective tissue. Again, dense because we have very high concentration of those fibers. However, irregular because if you look at this image, they're going in every which direction. Some are going this way, some are coming out at you, some are going in a different angle altogether. So again, these collagen fibers are arranged irregularly. You'll find these in very tough tissues. So particularly in tissues where points of stress are going to be from multiple directions. So think of like your eye. You look up, you look down, you look left, you look right, you roll your eyes. So those muscles are tugging on the white part of your eye from all different directions. So it has to resist that force from all different directions. So these fibers are going to be irregularly arranged. Same thing with the dermis of your skin. So here's this dermis of your skin. Again, your skin can get tugged on from many different directions, sometimes by that ant of yours or whoever. It could be an uncle, I suppose. But again, you want to resist the tearing, so the fibers will arrange themselves in many different directions. Now, elastic connective tissue. So here we have these elastic fibers, these sort of dark bands, and in fact, they kind of look like, I don't know, I guess they look like elastic that you would find in like socks, or I guess underwear or something like that. And just like those elastic fibers in socks or underwear, they are there to allow for stretching to occur, okay, and allow for that, whatever that is, to return to its original shape. So what you're looking at here is the heart, right? And this very large artery, the largest artery in your body, is the aorta. So it's under a lot of pressure. So every heartbeat is going to send a bunch of blood through that aorta, right? At very high pressure. So by this aorta being able to expand a little bit, it can relieve some of that pressure. I don't know, think of like eating a very big meal. it's important that your pants have some give to them, or your underwear. Because if they don't, the button will burst. In the case of your pants, it's a little bit of an embarrassment. In the case of your heart and your aorta, if that were to burst, you would die. And people who have aortic aneurysms do die very quickly. There's nothing you can really do for them because they bleed out so fast. And then, so you'll find it in other areas too, lung tissue, again, somewhere where you have lots of stretch and recoil. Vocal cords, obviously there's lots of movements in your vocal cords as you speak, they vibrate. And even in ligaments between your vertebrae. So you kind of twist and turn and everything kind of snaps back into place. Another type of connective tissue is going to be cartilage. Okay, so cartilage will have lots of different collagen and elastic fibers. And then the other part of that matrix, that ground substance, is going to be chondroitin sulfate. You may have heard of that. You may have heard of supplements that always try to promote chondroitin sulfate. And it's really kind of interesting, just as a little aside on those supplements. It helps some people, but not others. And they don't know why. It sometimes works and sometimes it doesn't. You can even give it to dogs, and there's plenty of dog foods that'll have that. And some dogs it helps, and some dogs it doesn't. So it suggests that it's not necessarily a placebo effect, because dogs will know what a placebo effect is. It's not like they know, like, oh, this is medicine, you know, yay. They just know, ew, it tastes good, or ew, it tastes bad, you know, whatever. But anyway, chondroitin sulfate, part of the matrix that makes up cartilage. The cells that make up cartilage are called chondrocytes. So keep that in your head right now. Chondro, whenever you hear chondro, it means cartilage. Cyte will mean cell. Okay? They basically make that matrix, and they kind of paint themselves into like a little bubble. Okay? It's a little space. That space that they are stuck in is called a lacunae. Okay? So a little space that they make that is called a lacunae. Each strip of cartilage, so the whole thing, is surrounded by other connective tissue called perichondrium. And this perichondrium will help anchor it to the surrounding tissues, wherever you happen to be. So it can be epithelial tissue, maybe muscle, it just depends on where you are. Cartilage has no blood or nerves. The only place where it has blood vessels or nerves is in this perichondrium. This means that when you damage cartilage, it has a very hard time repairing itself, because remember, any of those building materials, any of the nutrients are in blood. So if you don't have a very good blood supply, you really can't rebuild very quickly. Plus, in order to survive in an area where you don't have a lot of blood supply, that means these cells just in general are very metabolically slow. So you damage them. Can they repair themselves? Yes. Will it take forever? Yes. So usually what ends up happening is if you damage cartilage like in a joint, doctors will go in there and they'll usually either just shave it off, or if you have to, they'll try to repair it. The vast majority of the time, they'll just kind of cut off the damaged piece. All right. So we're going to talk about different types. First type is hyaline cartilage. Okay. In the fetus, so when you are still in utero, so in the womb, most of the bones of your body are first laid down in a hyaline cartilage model. Okay, so that means that you at one point, all your bones were simply hyaline cartilage. And later on, different cells came in and turned them into bone. Okay. As an adult, what you have at the ends of your bone are hyaline cartilage. They're sort of leftovers from this development. When they are in your joints, we call them articular cartilage. Joints, another fancy word, this will come up in like another week. Fancy word for joints is an articulation. So an articular cartilage is simply cartilage in a joint. Elastic cartilage, well, it simply has more elastic fibers in it than collagen fibers. So it has a little bit more give and spring to it. So classic place is in your ear. You can really move that ear around quite a bit, tug on it, kind of stretches even, and then it just goes back to where it was, right? So it helps maintain shape with a lot of give to it. Other places is the epiglottis. So there's a little flap covering your air passageway, your trachea. So whenever you swallow, that flap closes over the trachea so food doesn't happen to go down well, down to your lungs, I guess. So that's the epiglottis. So it's got to be springy and elastic. Eustachian tube is going to be the tube that goes from your ear to the back of, basically like way back of your throat up by your nose, and helps equalize the pressure in your ear. So when you go up in an airplane, you feel like your ears are popping and you swallow, you basically opened up the passageway to the eustachian tube and you've equalized the pressure in your ear. In any case, that tube is made up of elastic cartilage. Okay. The last type of cartilage is fibrocartilage. You did not see this in lab. Basically, this is going to be the toughest type, the strongest type. It's the most rigid and stiff type. So you see this in areas like the intervertebral discs. So when you hear of someone having a slip disc in their back, it's made up of fibrocartilage and it's moved into a position that's not supposed to be in. Okay? But it acts basically as a cushion and a shock absorber. Okay? So again, cartilage takes a very long time to repair it because it is avascular, so no blood vessels going to it. You have interstitial growth, which basically means that these will go, cartilage will allow things to grow longer, so there's growth in your cartilage that allows your bones to become longer. So obviously you are a lot taller now than when you were a little kid. Apositional growth means that not only do bones and cartilage does it get longer, okay, but it also gets wider. So interstitial growth means you're growing, the cartilage and then bones will be growing longer. Apositional growth means that these will also get wider. Okay? Your arms are not as wide as a 5-year-old's, thankfully, because you look weird, you know, T-Rex arms or something. Alright, I'm going to stop this video here so we can kind of, we're a little bit above that 20-minute mark and I don't want to overwhelm you in one video and make sure you have plenty of time to watch these. So I'll stop this here. Please make sure you take that quiz and then we'll pick up in the next part.